You shall not fall for the errors of illegitimate, illogical arguments based on irrelevant facts. So let's talk about fallacies. Fallacies are errors in the logic of an argument, making it more deceiving, but unfortunately also less true. They are very common, in fact so common that most people do not only oversee them, they too happily repeat them, being 100% convinced of their righteousness. There is a long list of illogical patterns used to manipulate speech and deceive an audience. I won't be able to cover them all in this video, but I will go over the most common and I also believe most dangerous ones in order to help you boost your mental immunity so you shall no longer fall for fallacies. The most common example is the appeal to emotion. Yes, we humans are very emotional beings, and if you do not believe me, then just think back about the last time you did something you really knew was wrong and yet you did it anyway. It's probably not even that long ago, and don't worry, it happens to all of us because we're really driven a lot by hormones and our instincts and a very impulsive reaction to many situations. But once we calm down and reapply logic, we see that emotion really overrides logic in many cases, and when it comes to logical arguments, they are not very helpful. Also very dangerous to our modern culture society is the ad hominem fallacy, which is used when speakers use flaws of the opponent or position to support their argument or conclusion rather than really using supporting fact patterns. Yet in a logical argument, it's very important that the premises and fact pattern are actually relevant and related to the conclusion, and attacking the opponent based on personal flaws that are not related is just false. Moving on, we have an example you must be familiar with. Probably just didn't know that it's a fallacy, and that is generalization. Humans are very intelligent beings, and so we have come to base many of our decisions on an average or result based on data, big data, huge data. And there's nothing wrong with that as long as we make sure that we use the appropriate sample size, appropriate diversity. Unfortunately, these type of data are easily manipulated, and that's why if we don't make sure that we have used the right sample, it comes to generalization. And even with the best sample, you will still have exceptions that you just can't involve. We people are so amazing, so special that we just think so differently in many ways. We might agree in some, but disagree in others. So you will never really have a sample that applies to all, 100% all of us. And that's why when it comes to arguments, you always have to make sure that the speaker is using the appropriate sample, verify the samples that they use to base their facts and then the conclusion on. And if it's not sufficient, don't worry about the argument. It's a fallacy called generalization. We have seen it in history so many times. I hope I don't have to bring you any examples. Hang on guys, there's more. The next fallacy is called the false dilemma, in which a speaker will establish a situation in which you have to decide between one or the other option or a limited set of options, while in reality you still have so many other options. It's just that the speaker didn't specifically bring them up. And so the argument is reduced into a non-real environment, and therefore the facts that are often used to draw these conclusions are simply wrong. Yes, I know it's a very obvious fallacy, but you'd be surprised how many people are getting truly obsessed. The result of a false dilemma fallacy is extremely dangerous and often used by cultists and politicians and membership groups to draw in new followers. You're either with us or against us. Well, no, not really. I just really happen to not really care all that much about it. Sorry. A fallacy with a very weird name, and I won't really get into why it's called that way, just look it up for yourself, is the red herring fallacy. Speakers frequently try to avoid subjects they are not very comfortable with, and so instead of bringing up a good argument, a counter argument, they will start a whole new type of argument, a distraction, so to say, and that's just not a really good way of debating or arguing. It's not what we do. A simple example, I know that this is wrong, but so is this. Well, guess what? They may both be wrong, and that's why it's really not a good argument if you're trying to convince an audience. A fallacy that I would have never dreamed of facing in our liberated Western free world is called the appeal to authority. A speaker will try to convince you of an argument or conclusion simply because it originated from an authority. While the authority might be true, it is not a good argument to say it is because the authority said it. In fact, you should ask, what is it that the authority said? Why is it? What is the, again, sample size or the fact pattern they have used? And then, based on this type of premise, you should base your own conclusion. The last fallacy that I would like to include in this video is called the slippery slope. We live in a very predictive society, and we often use future predictions based on past references in order to position our current moment. That's very common practice in the financial world, for example, with future trading, or we see it in politics when it comes to election and voting behavior. We see it in businesses. They rely a lot on these type of predictions when it comes to risky decisions. Again, it's common practice to use past references in order to make future predictions, but it's completely false to assume that they are actual conclusions. That's a tricky situation because we never really know. No matter how good our data is, there's always a risk, so it's always some sort of prediction, but it's never a fact, and you have to be very careful when you start to, for example, build a chain of future outcomes. That's often used in speeches to deceive an audience, but again, if you really think about it, you never know what happens next. There are so many other things that could happen just today, just tomorrow. We just came out of 2020, a year that had everybody in some sort waking up, changing their view or perspective onto the world. So really, you see the slippery slope is very dangerous, often used in speeches, and I just want you to be aware of this one. I could really go on and on with this. There are tons of fallacies out there. That's why I'm encouraging you to do your own research, because it's not really just gonna make you a much less vulnerable listener. It's also gonna make you a much more powerful and better speaker, and that's really what we need in these times right now. So do your own research, look into fallacies. I hope you were enjoying this little video. I'm always working on more, so make sure you check back in and subscribe. My name is Patrick Stehle, and I will see you guys soon.